Greetings everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Crime Whisper today. We turn our focus to the restless streets of São Paulo, a city where wealth and poverty collide, and where every alley hides a story of survival, ambition, and crime. Welcome to São Paulo Crime Stories. São Paulo never sleeps. From the glittering high-rises of Avenida Paulista to the sprawling favelas that climb the city's hillsides, it is a metropolis of contradictions, the financial capital of Brazil, a city of relentless ambition and crushing inequality, where billion-dollar deals are signed in glass towers, while, just a few blocks away, a teenager is robbed for his sneakers. The air vibrates with possibility and with danger, for those who have lived here long enough. The rhythm of São Paulo is familiar, traffic jams that stretch for hours. Street vendors selling pastel and caldo de cana on every corner, the constant hum of helicopters overhead, and the subtle awareness that crime lurks close by. Robberies, kidnappings, and gang disputes are not just headlines in the news. They are part of the fabric of daily life. It was on a sticky Thursday night in December, as the holiday crowds filled shopping malls and traffic snarled in the rain, that the story began at exactly 9:45 p.m. outside a luxury restaurant in the upscale neighborhood of Jardins. The wealthy businessman Ricardo Alves stepped out into the humid night. He was 62, owner of one of the largest logistics companies in Brazil, and no stranger to security concerns. The bodyguards flanked him, scanning the street as his driver pulled the black armored SUV around. Ricardo adjusted his cufflinks, checking his gold Rolex. He had closed a deal earlier that day, one that promised millions in revenue. He was smiling, relaxed until the motorcycles came to. Black Honda CG160s appeared from the corner, engines roaring as they sped toward the restaurant. Each carried two men, faces hidden behind tinted helmets. The bodyguards reached for their weapons, but the assailants moved with brutal precision. One motorcycle skidded to a stop in front of the SUV, blocking its path. The other circled behind, cutting off any escape. What happened next took less than a minute. The first gunshot shattered the night. Echoing through the quiet street, Ricardo's bodyguards fired back, diving for cover. But the attackers were faster. One of them aimed directly at Ricardo, squeezing the trigger. 3 rounds hit him squarely in the chest. He collapsed on the pavement, blood spreading across his white shirt. Attackers didn't linger. They grabbed a leather briefcase from the SUV rumored to contain sensitive documents and a large sum of cash, then sped off into the labyrinth of São Paulo's streets. By the time the police arrived, summoned by frantic witnesses, Ricardo Alves was dead. His bodyguards were injured, but alive. The murder sent shockwaves through the city. Ricardo wasn't just another wealthy man. He was deeply connected to São Paulo's political and economic elite. His company handled imports and exports worth billions, and whispers soon began. This was no simple robbery. It was an execution. Detective Mariana Costa was called to the scene that night, tall, sharp-eyed, and known for her relentless work ethic. She had built her career in the homicide division of the civil police. As she stepped out of her unmarked car, rain misting against her leather jacket, she scanned the crime scene with practiced eyes. The Jardins district was usually safe, patrolled heavily, and yet here lay a dead tycoon, executed in a manner that screamed professionalism. Mariana crouched by Ricardo's body, studying the placement of the gunshots. Clean, deliberate, all within seconds. Not amateurs, she murmured. Her partner, Inspector Rogerio Lima, shook his head. Definitely not. They knew his routine, knew where to hit him, and didn't hesitate. This wasn't about the money in the briefcase. This was a message. The media frenzy began within hours. By dawn, newspapers were already running headlines. Business magnate executed in Jardins. São Paulo's elite under attack. Police suspect gang involvement in Alves murder, but Mariana wasn't convinced it was a gang hit. São Paulo's gangs, most infamously the Primeiro Comando da Capital PCC, were ruthless. Yes, but their style was different. They thrived on intimidation. but rarely drew attention to themselves with such high-profile murders, unless absolutely necessary. At Ricardo's funeral 2 days later, the air was thick with tension. Politicians, businessmen, and lawyers filled the church. Their whispered conversations more about self-preservation than grief. Cameras flashed outside as protesters gathered, chanting about corruption and inequality. Mariana watched from a distance. Funerals were places where secrets often slipped, where alliances revealed themselves. She noticed a man standing apart from the crowd, a thin, sharp-featured figure in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. She recognized him instantly. Eduardo Dudu, a name whispered in police files but rarely spoken aloud, a broker between businessmen and criminals. Someone who thrived in the gray zone where legal contracts ended and illicit favors began. Why was Dudu here? As Mariana scribbled notes in her pad, she felt the weight of the case pressing on her shoulders. Ricardo Alves's murder wasn't just another homicide, it was the first domino in a chain reaction that could expose the darkest corners of Snow Palotha corruption, tying together politicians, corporations, and the underworld. That night, back at headquarters, Mariana reviewed the security footage. The motorcycles had been expertly maneuvered, plates stolen, helmets unmarked, but in one frame, barely a second long, she caught a detail. A tattoo on the wrist of one of the shooters. As he reached for the briefcase, it was small, but unmistakable. A black serpent coiled around a dagger. She froze. That symbol belonged to a shadowy offshoot of the PCC known as O's Serpents, a faction specializing in contract killings. Her instincts had been right. This wasn't random. This was a message, and someone very powerful had sent it. So, the story of Snow Paolo's latest crime wave began, not with a robbery, not with a gang dispute, but with the cold, calculated assassination of a man who thought he was untouchable. Detective Mariana Costa spent the weekend buried in paperwork and surveillance files. Sleep was scarce, coffee endless. Ricardo Alves's murder was already spiraling into something far larger than she'd imagined. The tattoo she'd spotted, the serpent coiled around a dagger, wasn't just a gang insignia, it was a signature. A mark, deliberately shown, meant to be recognized by those who understood the code. The Serpents, a faction born from dissent within the PCC, had been growing quietly for years. Unlike the PCC, whose influence stretched across prisons and politics alike, the Serpents operated more like contract killers for hire. They had no ideology, no pretense of order, just money and blood. On Monday morning, Mariana sat across from her partner, Inspector Joseri Lima, in their cramped office at the civil police headquarters. The walls were lined with case files, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead as relentless as the city's traffic. Ricardo wasn't just a businessman, Ruggiero said, flipping through financial records. His company has ties to offshore accounts, shell corporations in Panama, and contracts with government agencies. If the Serpents were hired, someone with serious resources is behind this. Mariana leaned back, rubbing her temples. The problem is everyone benefits from Alves's empire. Politicians, smugglers, even legitimate industries. We're not looking at a single enemy. We're looking at a circle of vultures. She tapped a folder on the desk. Inside were records of Ricardo's last business deals. One stood out, a shipping contract linked to the port of Santos, Brazil's busiest port, and a known hub for cocaine trafficking. The port was controlled by a tangled web of unions, cartels, and corrupt officials. Whoever controlled it held power far beyond Snow Paolo. But one name kept resurfacing in her notes: Eduardo Dudu. Friday's Dudu wasn't officially tied to any crime. He was a broker, a consultant, a fixer, always present when big deals were signed, never visible when they turned dirty. The kind of man who could drink champagne with a senator in the morning and hand a suitcase of cash to a gang lieutenant by night. Mariana knew if she wanted answers, she had to get closer to Dudu. That evening, she and Ruggiero staked out a sleek nightclub in Villa Olympia, one of Snow Paolo's wealthiest neighborhoods. Neon lights reflected off glass buildings. Music thumped from behind velvet ropes. and a line of expensive cars snaked down the street inside. Champagne flowed like water, and deals were whispered in the shadows between dancers and strobe lights at 11:30 p.m. Dudu arrived, sharp suit, slicked hair, flanked by 2 bodyguards who scanned the room like hawks. He walked with the calm arrogance of a man who knew he couldn't be touched. Mariana and Rogerio watched from a corner table. He's here. Rogerio mudereji Mariana nodded, her eyes fixed on Dudu. I'll handle it. She approached the bar, careful not to draw attention when Dudu ordered a drink. She slid onto the stool beside him. Scotch. Neat, she told the bartender, then turned casually. Didn't expect to see you here, Senor Fright. As Dudu's eyes flickered with recognition. Detective Costa, always a pleasure when the police visit my world. His voice was smooth. Practice. Mariana sipped her drink. You were at Ricardo Elvis's funeral. Strange, considering your business isn't exactly public. Dudu smirked. I knew Ricardo. We moved in the same circles. When powerful men die, it's polite to pay respects. She leaned closer, lowering her voice, and when powerful men are murdered, it's dangerous to be too close, especially when their killers leave signatures for the first time. Dudu's smile faded slightly. He tapped his glass. Buying time. Careful. Detective Snow Paulo is full of snakes. Chase one, and you might find yourself surrounded. Mariana studied him. His confidence was unshaken, but his eyes betrayed something. Nervous calculation, the way a chess player measures moves ahead. Before she could press further, one of his bodyguards whispered in his ear. Dudu rose smoothly. Another time. Perhaps enjoy your drink. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Mariana with more questions than answers. 2 days later, a break came from an unexpected source. A young man named Lucas Andrade, barely was picked up in a routine police sweep in the favela of Parasopolis. He was low-level, a courier for the Serpents, carrying messages and small packages. But what he carried that night wasn't small. A flash drive, hidden in his shoe, encrypted but full of records. When Mariana and Rogerio interrogated him, Lucas cracked quickly. He wasn't hardened. Not yet. I just run errands, he said, sweat dripping down his forehead under the harsh interrogation light. I don't know who killed Ricardo, I swear, but I know Dudu. He pays us, not directly through others, but everyone knows. Mariana's heart raced. Pays you for what? Lucas hesitated. Contracts, jobs, sometimes protection, sometimes. It's the Serpents don't move unless the money comes from him. Rogerio slammed the table, so he ordered Ricardo's murder. Lucas shook his head frantically. I don't know. All I know is Ricardo crossed someone powerful, something about the port. He was making deals outside of the circle, that's why he had to go. The flash drive confirmed pieces of Lucas's story. Hidden behind layers of codes were transaction records, millions flowing through offshore accounts linked to both Ricardo and Dudu. There were also notes, cryptic but telling, about shipments, clearances, and one phrase that appeared multiple times. The Serpent strikes where the hand points. It was all circumstantial, but it painted a chilling picture. By Friday, Mariana felt the city shifting around her. Newspapers screamed speculation. Rival politicians used Ricardo's death as ammunition, and whispers in the underworld grew louder. The Serpents were on the move, and Dudu seemed untouchable. Late that night, as she drove home through the endless sprawl of Snow Paulo, her phone buzzed. It was an unlisted number. She answered cautiously. Costa, a male voice, distorted, came through. Stop digging. Detective Ricardo was only the beginning. Others are marked. If you value your life, walk away. The line went dead. Mariana gripped the steering wheel, her pulse hammering. Someone was watching her, close enough to know her number, close enough to know she was getting too close. The city lights blurred outside her window, helicopters thundering overhead, and in that moment, she realized she wasn't just investigating a murder. She was stepping into a war one fought in boardrooms, alleys, and prison cells, where every move could be her last stand. The Serpents were waiting. Paulo was a machine with too many moving parts, and Mariana Costa knew she had just pulled on a gear that connected to the entire engine. Ricardo Elvis's assassination had cracked open a network that stretched from the streets of Parasopolis to the glass towers of Avenida Paulista, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the serpents waited like predators, feeding on whoever dared to cross them. The warning call still echoed in her mind. It wasn't a bluff. If the serpents knew her number, they knew her address, her routines, her weaknesses. She doubled her precautions, driving unmarked cars, switching routes, sleeping with her service pistol on the nightstand. But paranoia alone couldn't solve the case. She needed to cut deeper on Monday morning. She and Rogerio met with a confidential informant inside a dingy cafe near the old Luz station. The man was jittery, his hands trembling as he stirred sugar into his coffee. His name was Felipe Duarte, a dock worker at the port of Santos, and someone who had seen more than he wanted to. They killed Ricardo because of the containers, Felipe whispered. Glancing over his shoulder, he was trying to move shipments without paying tribute. Shipments of what? Mariana asked. Felipe hesitated, lowering his voice. Cocaine, tons of it hidden in containers marked as soy, coffee, electronics, whatever passed inspection. Everyone knows the port is the artery of the trade. Ricardo thought he was powerful enough to bypass the system. He thought money and politics could protect him. Rogerio leaned forward. And who controls the system? Felipe's eyes darted nervously. Dudu, always Dudu. But he doesn't work alone. He's the bridge on one side, the politicians who sign the contracts on the other, the serpents who enforce the rules. You pay him, and the port is open. You cheat him. His voice cracked. You end up like Ricardo. Mariana's jaw tightened. It fit too well. Ricardo trying to expand his empire without cutting in the serpents, Dudu acting as middleman, and an execution carried out to remind everyone that no one, not even billionaires, was untouchable. But Felipe wasn't done. He pulled out a crumpled slip of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. On it was a name, handwritten. Deputado Alvaro Nunze, powerful congressman from São Paulo, known publicly as a reformist, a man who gave speeches about fighting corruption while his face beamed from campaign posters across the city. He's the hand, Felipe whispered. Dudu is the mouth. The serpents are the teeth together. They control everything. Before Mariana could ask more, Felipe stood abruptly. Fear etched into his face. I've said too much. If they find out. He left money on the table and slipped out into the rain, disappearing into the crowd that evening. Mariana returned to headquarters and cross-referenced Felipe's lead, Alvaro Nunes. The name opened a floodgate of files, questionable contracts, donations from shell companies, unexplained wealth. Nothing concrete enough for prosecution, but enough to reveal the pattern. She leaned over the desk, staring at a map of São Paulo and the port. Red strings connected politicians, businesses, and gangs. And at the center sat Dudu, smiling in every photograph like the devil in a tailored suit. Rogerio broke the silence. If Nunes is really backing this, we're not just chasing criminals, we're chasing the state itself. Mariana nodded grimly. Which means if we go after them, we're on our own. The serpent struck again 2 nights later. This time, the victim was Daniel Moreira, a mid-level manager at Ricardo's company. He was found in his apartment in Mohima, shot twice in the head. Execution style, no signs of forced entry, no valuables stolen, just a message on the wall, written in blood. It was a crude drawing of a serpent. The crime scene was suffocating with dread. Mariana stared at the symbol, her fists clenched. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was escalation. Anyone connected to Ricardo was being erased. Witnesses, partners, maybe even family. She thought of Felipe, the terrified dock worker. She dialed his number immediately, but it rang endlessly the next morning. His body was found in the trunk of a burned-out car on the outskirts of the city. Mariana felt the weight pressing harder on her chest. Every ledge she touched turned into a corpse. The serpents weren't just cleaning up loose ends, they were sending her a message too. Despite the danger, Mariana pressed forward. She arranged a meeting with a journalist she trusted, Clara Mendez, a relentless investigative reporter who had built her career exposing São Paulo's political scandals in a quiet bar away from the city center. Mariana slid a folder across the table. Inside were the financial records from the flash drive, Felipe's note about Nunes, and photos of the crime scenes. This isn't just organized crime. Mariana said this is state-sanctioned murder. If I die tomorrow, you need to publish this. Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. If what you're saying is true, it's explosive, but it's also suicide for both of us. Mariana leaned in. Then we'd better make it worth it. But the serpents were always a step ahead that night. As Mariana drove home, she noticed headlights trailing her car. She sped up, weaving through the endless traffic. But the motorcycle stayed close at a red light. The rider pulled up beside her window, helmeted face turning toward her. Her hand tightened around her pistol. The rider raised 2 fingers like a mock salute, then sped off into the night. It was a warning. They could take her any time. Mariana sat in her car, heart pounding, sweat dripping down her neck. The line between hunter and prey was blurring fast. She was no longer investigating the serpents. She was part of their game. The next morning, she walked into headquarters to find her desk ransacked, files missing, her computer wiped. When she confronted her superiors, they shrugged. Probably an error, they said, but their eyes told her the truth. Someone inside the department was working with the serpentestrist, was gone. She couldn't even count on her own budget. Found her later in the parking lot. Mariana, this is bigger than us. If Nunes is really involved, if the serpents are this deep, we can't fight it alone. They'll bury us before we get close. She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the damp morning air. Then we don't fight them alone. We fight them on every front: media, street, whatever it takes. If they want war, let's give them one. But even as she said it, she knew the cost would be heavy. The serpents had already claimed 3 lives since Ricardo's murder, and now, as power shifted and blood flowed, São Paulo itself felt like a city on the edge of collapse. And in the shadows, the serpent coiled tighter. The city pulsed with tension from the favelas to the financial district. Whispers of the serpents spread like smoke. The murders of Ricardo, Alves, Daniel Moreira, and Felipe Duarte were no longer isolated acts. They were pieces of a message. No one was beyond reach. Detective Mariana Costa had reached her breaking point. The case files were gutted, her superiors compromised, and her name had surely been marked on the serpent's list. But she wasn't ready to surrender. Too many bodies had already been left behind. Her only path forward was risky, almost suicidal. To confront the snake at its head. It started with a leaked tip. Clara, the journalist, had dug through shell companies and campaign donations until she unearthed evidence tying Deputado Alvaro Nunes directly to the offshore accounts linked to Ricardo and Dudu transfers, bribes, coded messages, all pointing to a system where political protection and drug shipments went hand in hand. Tonight, Clara whispered over the phone, Nunes and Dudu are meeting at a private estate in Morumbi. High walls, guards, but if you want proof, that's where it'll be. Mariana stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her service pistol holstered under her jacket. She wasn't supposed to operate without authorization, but authorization was worthless when the department itself was compromised. If she was caught, she'd be disavowed. If she failed, she'd be dead. But if she succeeded, she might finally drag the serpents into the light. The Morumbi estate was a fortress, manicured lawns, motion detectors, armed guards pacing the walls. Rogerio had begged her not to go, but in the end, he came anyway. Parking their unmarked car in the shadows of jacaranda trees, they moved like ghosts, slipping past the outer perimeter, scaling a sidewall where cameras overlapped inside. Music and laughter spilled from the villa, where São Paulo's elite drank wine and toasted 2 deals made in blood from a dark corner of the garden. Mariana peered through the glass windows. At the center of the dining room table sat Dudu Fright, smiling as always, his glass raised beside him. Equally at ease was Alvaro Nunes, the congressman, his suit immaculate, his gestures grand. As he spoke, between them lay a briefcase. A deal was being sealed. Mariana's pulse quickened. She pressed her phone to the window, recording everything: the faces, the briefcase, the money changing hands. It wasn't enough for conviction, but it was a crack in their armor then. Suddenly, a shadow fell across her boanoid. Detective, she spun, pistol raised, but too late. A guard loomed, weapon aimed squarely at her chest. Ruggiero tried to intervene, but more guards swarmed from the darkness within seconds. Both detectives were disarmed and dragged inside. The villa's laughter died as Mariana and Ruggiero were thrown to the floor. Dudu rose slowly, his smile widening. "I warned you, Detective Costa," he said, his voice calm, almost polite. "But you don't listen. You're stubborn, admirable, but dangerous." Mariana glared up at him, blood trickling from her lip. "You killed Ricardo, you killed them all, and you think you can keep hiding behind politicians?" Dudu crouched beside her, his cologne sharp, his eyes cold. "Hiding? No, detective, I don't hide. I'm right here, in plain sight, because Snow Paulo needs me. Do you think these men," he gestured at Nunes, "and the others, could hold power without me? The city runs on deals. On order, I simply maintain the balance." Alvaro Nunes chuckled, swirling his wine. "Snow Paulo is too big to be governed by laws alone. We govern it with control, and people like you, Mariana, are the only real threat. Not because you can stop us, you can't, but because you make noise, and noise is bad for business." Ruggiero spat on the floor. "Your parasites, and parasites always get burned out." Dudu sighed. "So dramatic." He nodded to the guards. "Take them out back, make it quick." The guards dragged Mariana and Ruggiero across the polished marble, through a back door, into the cool night air of the garden. They were forced to their knees, beside the swimming pool, the city lights glittering beyond the hills. Mariana's mind raced. She had one chance left as a guard pressed a pistol to her head. She whispered to Ruggiero. The phone upload, he understood instantly. The recording face, briefcase, money was still on her phone. If they could just get it out, even if they died, the story wouldn't die with them. With a sudden lunge, Ruggiero slammed his shoulder into one guard, knocking him off balance. Chaos erupted. Shots rang out. Mariana twisted free, diving for her phone, pressing the upload button with trembling fingers. A single word appeared on the screen: sending. A bullet grazed her arm, pain searing through her flesh. She dropped the phone into the pool as another guard tackled her, fists pounding. Then came the sound of sirens. Dozens of red and blue lights flared beyond the estate walls. Civil police, federal police, even journalists swarming the compound like a tidal wave. Clara had done her part. She had traced Mariana's signal and leaked the location, and now the villa was no longer a fortress. The firefight was brutal. Guards exchanged bullets with police. Glass shattered. Guests fled screaming into the night. Dudu tried to slip away through a side exit, but Mariana, battered and bleeding, intercepted him. She leveled her pistol at his chest. "It's over." He raised his hands, smirking even as the chaos raged. "Is it? Arrest me, and someone else will take my place. Kill me, and I become a martyr in the underworld. Either way." The serpent still coils. Mariana's finger hovered on the trigger for a moment. Rage consumed her, an urge to end it permanently, but she lowered the gun. "Not today," she said. "You're not a martyr. You're a criminal, and now the world will see you for what you are." Police stormed in, forcing Dudu to the ground, cuffing him as he smiled like a man who still believed he couldn't lose. Alvaro Nunes was dragged from the dining room, screaming about immunity and politics, but the cameras caught everything: the footage, the raid, the arrests. Snow Paulo's secret spilled into the headlines overnight, to the days that followed. The city shook. Newspapers declared it. The fall of the serpent. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Nunes. Corporations severed ties with Dudu's network, and protests erupted outside. Congress demanding reforms. But Mariana knew the truth: the serpents hadn't died. Their leaders might be in chains, but their roots ran deep into prisons, into neighborhoods. into the very bones of Snow. Paulo cutting off one head didn't kill the serpent, it only made it angrier. She stood on her apartment balcony days later, arm bandaged, cigarette glowing in the night. She watched the helicopters sweep across the skyline, sirens wailed far below. Another crime unfolding in another corner of the sprawling Siderogio joined her, holding 2 beers. "We did it," he said softly. Mariana exhaled smoke. "We survived, that's not the same." He clinked his bottle against hers. Survival is a victory in Snow Paulo. She allowed herself a thin smile, but her eyes never left the city. She knew the serpent would strike again, because in Snow Paulo, crime wasn't a story that ended. It was the story the city was built, and she would be there. Whispering back to the darkness for a moment, Snow Paulo believed it had witnessed a victory. Newspapers showed images of Eduardo Dudu Fritas in handcuffs. His smirk finally wiped away under the harsh flash of cameras. Congressman Alvaro Nunes was led out of court in disgrace. Stripped of his immunity, headlines called it the largest anti-corruption raid of the decade. But victories in Snow Paulo never last within weeks. The system began bending back. Dudu's lawyers filed appeals. Stalling his trial, judges whispered about bribes. Nunes' allies in Brasilia lobbied to delay hearings even behind bars. The serpents flexed their reach, guards were threatened. Witnesses recanted. Evidence went missing. Detective Mariana Costa watched it unfold with quiet rage. She had risked her life, buried friends, exposed the serpent's nest, and yet, somehow, the serpent was already writhing back to life at night. She couldn't sleep. Every sound outside her window made her hand drift toward her pistol. She had enemies in prisons, in politics, maybe even in her own department. Survival was no longer a job skill, it was her daily ritual. Rogerio noticed the change. "You can't carry this city alone," he told her one evening, sitting across from her in their favorite boteco. "We clipped one head. That's all but Snow Paulo has 100 more." Mariana sipped her beer in silence, eyes fixed on the television in the corner. The news was reporting another killing in Parasopolis. 2 men executed, their bodies marked with serpent tattoos. The serpents were reminding everyone they weren't finished. The turning point came when Clara Mendez, the journalist who had risked everything to leak the Marembe raid, received a package at her office. Inside was a USB drive, and a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "If I die, the story doesn't." The drive contained hours of recordings, conversations between Nunes and other politicians, coded messages from Dudu, even references to prison bosses linked to the PCC. Clara brought it straight to Mariana. "This isn't just Snow Paulo," Clara whispered. "This is the entire country. They're building something bigger. Something that doesn't end with the serpents." Mariana felt the chill. If the PCC was moving through proxies like the serpents, then Ricardo Alves's murder had only been the spark. A war for control was brewing, one that could consume Brazil's largest city. The first explosion came 3 nights later. Literally a car bomb detonated outside a police precinct in the Zona Leste, killing 3 officers and wounding a dozen civilians within hours. The serpents claimed responsibility in graffiti sprayed across walls near the site. "The serpent never dies." Panic swept through the city. Residents stocked up on food. Businesses closed early. Armored cars patrolled the avenues for Mariana. It was proof the investigation hadn't ended the war, it had ignited it as chaos spread. Mariana found herself summoned to a private meeting with the state governor inside the Palacio dos Ben. The air was heavy, with cigar smoke and quiet desperation. "You've done good work, Costa," the governor said, his tone more weary than congratulatory. "But you've also unleashed something we can't control. We need calm, not headlines. Step back, leave this to others." Mariana's jaw clenched. "Step back, Governor. They're bombing precincts. They're killing civilians. If we back down now, the serpents win. The city will belong to them." The governor's eyes hardened. "The city already belongs to them. You just made it obvious." Mariana left the meeting with a hollow realization. She was fighting not just criminals, but a system that had already surrendered that night. A message was slipped under her apartment door. No signature, just a piece of paper with a drawing of a serpent and 3 words. "We are waiting." Mariana loaded her pistol, locked every window, and sat awake until dawn. She knew the war wasn't over. She knew the serpents would strike again, but what haunted her most wasn't fear of death. It was the certainty that even if she survived, Snow Paulo would keep birthing new serpents. The city was too vast, too hungry, too corrupt to ever be clean but still. She whispered to herself, lighting a cigarette as the helicopters droned overhead. "I'll keep hunting because, in Snow Paulo, crime never ended. It only echoed louder, deadlier, and closer each time, and the serpent's echo was just beginning fire on the horizontal." Paulo woke each morning to the sound of helicopters chopping through the gray sky, their shadows sliding across endless rooftops. But in September, the city's pulse quickened with a new kind of dread day. Wave of attacks swept across the peripheries, buses torched in Capo Redondo, bank trucks ambushed in Santo Andre, and a judge's convoy riddled with bullets on Avenida Rebotcas. Each strike carried the same graffiti: "Tag a serpent coiled around a crown." The serpents were back inside Carandiru prison. Dudu Freitas adjusted to life behind bars better than anyone expected. Guards swore he had more influence inside than outside. Phones, smuggled in under bread loaves, carried his orders. Lawyers carried his threats. Rival gangs who thought his arrest was their opportunity quickly found themselves kneeling or bleeding. Snow Paulo has 2 governments now, one officer muttered to Mariana during a tense strategy briefing. "Juan at the Palacio. One in Carandiru. Guess which one answers faster." Mariana said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Clara Mendez worked around the clock. The recordings on the mysterious USB drive had opened a labyrinth of corruption. She traced bank transfers from Nunes' shell companies to offshore accounts, funneled through construction contracts and police unions. Every name she uncovered deepened. The rot-butt digging came with shadows. A black SUV began, tailing her from her office to her apartment. Anonymous emails warned her to shut the notebook before it shuts you one night. She returned home to find her door ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but her walls had been defaced in red spray paint. "Lies kill Clara," called Mariana in a panic. "You need to disappear for a while," Mariana urged. "I disappear, the story dies." Clara shot back. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was steel. "And if it dies, they win." The breaking point arrived with the massacre at Luz Station. It was a Sunday evening when commuters flooded the platforms. Rushing for trains, a group of masked men entered with rifles hidden in duffel bags. Shots cracked, echoing through the marble arches. By the time police arrived, 15 lay dead. Dozens wounded. Witnesses swore. The killers shouted, "The serpent feeds." The attack shattered the illusion of control. Snow Paulo's governor declared a state of emergency. Armored vehicles rolled through downtown. Curfews silenced nightlife. The city of endless motion suddenly felt like a battlefield. Mary walked the station's blood-slicked floor. Hours later, her boots echoing against broken glass, Rogerio joined her, face pale. "This isn't about power anymore," he whispered. "This is about fear. They're showing the whole city who rules." Mariana looked at the bullet-riddled tiles and thought of Clara, thought of the names buried on the USB. "They don't rule me," she said coldly. "Not yet." But even as she spoke, she sensed the noose tightening. Her colleagues warned her to drop the case. Her superiors quietly reassigned her to administrative duty. Her neighbors avoided eye contact. Someone had spread rumors that she was marked, cursed, doomed. One night, returning home, Mariana found a snake's carcass nailed to her front door. Its body was cut in half, its head left gaping. She didn't scream, she didn't even flinch. She simply drew her pistol, scanned the street, and whispered into the darkness, "Come closer." In the weeks that followed, 2 paths began forming before her on one side. The law, crippled and rotting, where evidence vanished, witnesses died, and justice, drowned in bureaucracy, on the other side. The shadows' contacts offering her weapons, informants offering her names, whispers suggesting alliances with gangs opposed to the Serpentess Maria. Realized something she had feared all along. To destroy the serpent, she might have to become one herself. The line blurred each night. She stared into the mirror, her badge in one hand. Her pistol in the other one symbolized order. The other survival Snow Paulo wasn't giving her the luxury of both on somewhere in the heart of the city. Dudu Freitas smiled in his prison cell, as if he already knew which path she would take, because in Snow Paulo, the serpent never really dies. It tempts, it corrupts, and, as the fires burned on the horizon, Mariana Costa wondered how much longer she could resist the venom seeping through the city's veins. When the streets burned, the smell of smoke clung to Snow Paulo like a second skin. Entire bus fleets had been torched in Santo Amaro, filling the sky with black columns that curled into the night. Children covered their faces with shirts as they ran past burning vehicles. Sirens wailed until dawn. The serpents had declared war, not just on the state, but on the people themselves. Fear was their loudspeaker, and the city was listening. Mariana Costa stood on the overpass above Marginal Teat, staring at the line of flames that stretched across the horizon. Rogerio joined her, exhausted, his bulletproof vest dusted with ash. "They're bleeding us," he muttered. Every unit stretched thin, every officer on double shifts, and still, they hit where we're weakest. Mariana's eyes didn't move from the fire. "That's because someone's feeding them our playbook." Rogerio turned to her. "You mean leaks?" She nodded. "The serpents know our routes, our raid times. This isn't just luck. Someone high up is selling us out." Clara Mendez was in hiding by then, moving from safe house to safe house. Her laptop, her only weapon. The USB files revealed something more chilling than corruption. A pact between certain politicians and the PCC leadership. The serpents weren't rivals of the PCC. They were a testing ground, a laboratory of chaos designed to stretch the state until it broke. She recorded a video statement, planning to release it if she was killed. "This is not about gangs. This is about a new order. The serpent is only the beginning." But as she uploaded encrypted backups, her hands trembled for every truth she uncovered. A new thread appeared twice. She caught men tailing her near Liberdade once. A note was slipped under her cafe table. "The next bullet won't miss." Still, she pressed on. Mariana, meanwhile, faced a choice: an old informant on it. Once a low-level PCC runner approached her in a dim bar in BR's. "They're planning something big," he whispered, glancing around nervously. "Bigger than Luz Station. You want details? You gotta give me something back." "What?" Mariana asked flatly. "Protection, a way out." "Irat, I'm a dead man." She hesitated. Helping him meant bending rules, falsifying paperwork, risking her badge, but refusing him meant blindness, and blindness in Snow Paulo meant coffins. Finally, she leaned in. What Tonino revealed chilled her. Serpents were preparing a coordinated strike against Snow Paulo's financial district, Banco Central branches, armored trucks, even the stock exchange itself. Not just robbery, but spectacle, a message to prove the state's money was no safer than its people. The attack was scheduled in weeks, maybe days. Mariana rushed the intel up the chain of command, but her superiors waved it off. "We can't move on rumors," they said. "Do you want us to lock down Palista Avenue on hearsay?" She realized then, the betrayal was deeper than leaks. It was paralysis. The people who should defend the city were choosing inaction, whether out of fear or profit. And so, for the first time in her career, Mariana planned to act outside the badge. Dudu Freitas grew restless in Carandiru. Word of Tonino's betrayal reached him one evening. Guards found the body hanging in a cell, throat slit, serpent tattoo carved into the chest. No one needed to guess who had ordered it. Dudu was still the serpent's head, even in chains the night before the planned attack. Mariana met with Clara in a crumbling warehouse near Muka. Rain hammered the corrugated roof. As Clara laid out her files, "You see the pattern?" Clara pointed at names, dates, transfers. The politicians aren't just protecting them, they're partners this strike tomorrow. It's funded from above. It's theater and we're the audience. Mariana clenched her fists. Not if we burned the stage first. Clara looked at her. You're talking about going rogue. Mariana's gaze hardened. I'm talking about survival. When dawn broke, Snow Paulo braced for another day of uncertainty, but in the shadows, pieces were moving. Mariana, Clara, and a handful of loyal officers prepared an unsanctioned interception. They knew the serpent was coming for the city's heartland for the first time. Mariana wondered if stopping it would require becoming just as ruthless as the monster she hunted, because, on these streets, law and crime were no longer opposites. They were reflections. The day the money bled, the morning sun burned over Avenida, glinting off glass towers that housed banks, brokerages, and global corporations. To the unknowing crowd, it was just another Monday. Commuters rushing, horns blaring, vendors selling coffee and Pio de Quasio on the sidewalks, but beneath the polished surface, Snow Paulo was a powder keg. At precisely 10:15 a.m., 3 white delivery vans rolled into the financial district. Their license plates were clean, their drivers wearing courier uniforms. Security guards waved them through without question. 5 minutes later, the first explosion ripped open the Banco's central branch on Rua Augusta. Windows shattered, alarms screamed, and smoke billowed into the streets. Seconds after, gunfire erupted. Masked men spilled from the vans with rifles, firing in controlled bursts. Civilians screamed and scattered. The serpents had arrived. Mariana Costa was already moving. She and Rogerio had positioned their small rogue team near the district, acting on Tonino's intel. When the first blast shook the street, Rogerio cursed Christ. They weren't bluffing. Mariana drew her pistol, scanning the chaos. No time split. The team cut them off before they reached the stock exchange. Her radio buzzed with panicked chatter from official police units, but the orders coming down were confused, contradictory, even paralyzed. Too many commanders, too much fear. The system was choking. Mariana knew she couldn't rely on backup. Clara was there too, not by design, but by obsession. She had followed a lead that the serpents wanted their strike filmed, broadcast, immortalized. Carrying a hidden camera in her satchel, she blended with fleeing civilians, recording everything: the rifles, the shouts, the serpent graffiti spray-painted across burning cars. The footage would prove her theory. This wasn't robbery, it was theater. But as she ducked behind a concrete pillar, she realized one masked man was staring straight at her, his rifle lowered. His finger tightened. Mariana's shot came first. The gunman collapsed, mask slipping to reveal a serpent tattoo on his jaw. Clara gasped, locking eyes with Mariana from across the chaos for a moment. The journalist and the detective shared the same thought. This isn't just about law, this is about survival. Move, Mariana shouted, dragging Clara into cover. Bullets sparked against steel beams as serpents advanced. Dudu Freitas, locked in Carandaru, watched the coverage on a smuggled cell phone despite bars and walls. His smile stretched wide. This, he murmured to his cellmate, is how you own a city. You don't just steal its money, you steal its fear. Back on Palista, the battle escalated. The serpents weren't just looting, they were performing. One group fired into the air, forcing civilians onto their knees, filming the terror with phones. Another squad planted more explosives, shaping the skyline with fire. Mariana's small team fought ferociously, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Rogerio took a round to the shoulder, collapsing against a kiosk. Blood seeped through his vest. Go, he yelled. Don't let them take the exchange. Mariana ignored him, dragging him into cover while firing back. Her mind raced. This wasn't containment anymore. This was Warthen came. The twist as a group of serpents stormed toward the stock exchange. A second wave of attackers appeared, but not serpents. These men wore no masks. Their tattoos marked them as PCC, and, instead of joining, they opened fire. On the Serpentist financial district became a battlefield between two criminal empires, bullets cutting civilians down as collateral. The pact Clara feared had fractured the city wasn't just under attack, it was being torn apart by rivals. Mariana seized the chaos. She sprinted forward, weaving between shattered cars, picking off serpents one by one. Clara, reckless but resolute, followed, filming everything, even as bullets whistled past her odds. The exchange steps. Mariana confronted the serpent's field commander, a tall, muscular man with a serpent tattoo curling across his scalp. He grinned as she raised her pistol. "You think killing me saves this city?" he sneered. "You're just cutting weeds. The root is already inside your government." Before Mariana could respond, Rogerio, bleeding but still standing, fired the shot that dropped him. The commander's body slumped on the steps, his words hanging heavier than his corpse. By noon, the firefight dwindled. PCC fighters vanished into the alleys. The serpents left bodies and burning vehicles in their wake. Civilians huddled and blood-stained. Lobbies' sirens wailed as official forces finally swept in, too late to stop the carnage, just in time to count it. Mariana sat on the curb, gun still in her hand, uniform torn and soaked in sweat beside her. Clara uploaded the footage to every channel she could reach. "You realize," Clara whispered. "This isn't the end." Mariana nodded, staring at the skyline now, clouded with smoke. "No, it's the beginning." That night, São Paulo didn't sleep. Screens replayed the explosions, the gunmen, the chaos. The world watched Brazil's financial heart bleed, and somewhere in a dark cell, Dudu Freitas whispered into a smuggled phone, his smile unbroken. "The serpent has many heads today. You cut one tomorrow, more will rise." The broken scales. The city counted its dead 4 days, 37 civilians, 11 police officers, 24 gang members. The stock exchange's marble steps were still scarred by bullet holes, and black scorch marks stained the glass tower. São Paulo's financial heart had survived, but barely. Politicians flooded the airwaves, demanding justice, swearing reforms, promising a new dawn of security. But Mariana Costa had heard it all before. The same voices that had ignored her warnings now thundered with outrage behind closed doors. She knew many of them were already negotiating with lobbyists, insurers, and even crime intermediaries. The serpent's fangs reached to deep. Congressman Alvaro Nunes, once disgraced, suddenly reappeared in the headlines, not in handcuffs, but on talk shows, spinning himself as a victim of false accusations. His lawyers painted him as the target of a smear campaign by journalists and rogue cops. Clara Mendez nearly broke her laptop in fury watching him on TV. "He should be in prison, not on prime time," she hissed. Mariana just shook her head. "Snakes shed their skin, doesn't mean they're dead." And Dudu Freitas basked in notoriety, despite being implicated in the Paulista strike. His trial kept stalling, witnesses disappeared, judges postponed hearings, some jurors received threats, others bribes. One guard muttered, "If he walks free, this city will burn again." Mariana wasn't so sure the city would wait that long. Meanwhile, the PCC Serpent's rivalry exploded across the peripheries. Shootings in Capo Redondo, kidnappings in Guarulhos, executions in Osasco. Each side painted their victories across walls with graffiti. Serpents coiling around crowns, daggers stabbing snakes. Ordinary families suffered the most. Parents kept children home from school, shops closed after dark, streets emptied earlier each night, leaving silence broken only by distant gunfire. The war wasn't contained, it was spreading. For Mariana, the breaking point came during an internal review, sitting before a panel of stiff-suited superiors. She was accused of reckless behavior for acting without orders. "During the Paulista strike you endangered civilians," one colonel said coldly. "I saved civilians," she snapped back. "Where were your units when people were bleeding on Avenida P?" Silence fell. Everyone knew the answer. Units had been ordered to hold back, whether out of fear or collusion. The result was the same. Mariana stormed out, tossing her badge onto the table. It clattered like a verdict. That evening, she met Clara in a dimly lit cafe near Villa Madalena. They want me quiet, Mariana said, staring into her untouched coffee. And if I stay, they'll bury me in paperwork until I stop breathing. Clara leaned forward. Then don't stay, work with me off the books if the system's broken. We build our own. Mariana gave a humorless laugh. A journalist and a cop without a badge. That's not a team, that's a suicide pact maybe, Clara replied softly. But it's the only chance this city has. Meanwhile, in the governor's palace, quiet negotiations unfolded. Rumors swirled of a truce being brokered between PCC leadership and certain political figures. The serpents, weakened but not destroyed, were being left out. It meant one thing. Another war was coming, and Snow Hollow was the battlefield. Late one night, Mariana returned to her apartment to find the door unlocked, hand on her pistol. She entered slowly. On her table lay a small box. Inside was a silver serpent pendant. Coiled around a crown, a note lay beneath it. You cut one head, more will grow. Choose your side, Costa. She sat down heavily, staring at the pendant glinting under the weak light bulb. Her badge was gone. The law had abandoned her. The city was begging for someone ruthless enough to fight fire with fire, and Mariana wondered, for the first time, whether she was still a hunter or if she was already becoming the serpent herself. Into the serpent's den. The streets of Snow Hollow had grown quieter, but not safer. Silence was a different kind of violence. It meant people were too afraid to speak, too afraid to live. Mariana Costa felt the silence inside her own chest. No badge, no unit, no shield between her and the city's venom. And yet, the serpent still whispered her name. One night, in a warehouse near Muke, Mariana met Tonia, the PCC informant who had first tipped her about the Ballista strike. His face was thinner, his eyes darting like a hunted animal. You said you wanted to know who's pulling the strings, he asked. Mariana folded her arms. Talk. Tonino hesitated, then leaned closer. There's a summit coming. PCC leaders, politicians, bankers, not just Snow, Brasilia too. They're carving the country into territories. The serpents, their pawns. Disposable where? Mariana demanded. Campos do Jordão. In the mountains. 2 weeks. He slid her a burner phone. Call this number the night before. They'll tell you where to be. Mariana narrowed her eyes. Why help me? Tonino's laugh was bitter. Because pawns get sacrificed first, and I'm tired of waiting for my turn. When she told Clara, the journalist's face lit with both fear and exhilaration. This is it, Clara whispered. Proof of the alliance? Proof the state itself is infected. Mariana shook her head. Proof doesn't stop bullets. You'll be walking into a nest of killers. Clara smiled grimly. Then we'll walk in together. The weeks leading up to the summit bled tension into every corner of the city. Bus burnings resumed. Bodies surfaced in the Teat River, and whispers spread of a new faction rising from within the serpents. A younger, more ruthless generation, eager to outshine Dudu Fritas and prove themselves. They called themselves as Garasta, Clausen like their predecessors. They weren't interested in truces or negotiations. They wanted chaos. On the eve of the summit, Mariana drove through the rain-soaked highways into the Serra da Mantiqueira. Clara sat in the passenger seat, typing feverishly on her laptop, uploading drafts into encrypted vaults. If we die tomorrow, Clara said without looking up. The story still lives. Mariana kept her eyes on the road. If we die tomorrow, the story doesn't matter. Then why are you here? Clara asked. Mariana didn't answer that. Rendezvous point was a remote chalet tucked deep into the pine forests of Campos do Jordão. Black SUVs lined the driveway, their windows tinted, their drivers armed inside. Laughter and music spilled into the night. Mariana and Clara hid in the shadows, watching through the glass walls. They saw it all. Politicians shaking hands with PCC cape, serpent lieutenants trading envelopes with bankers, judges drinking with killers. It was worse than Mariana imagined. This wasn't corruption, it was governance. The summit wasn't criminals infiltrating the state. The summit was the state, Clara whispered. If I can record just 5 minutes of this. Her voice trailed off as headlights approached. Another convoy from it stepped a man neither of them expected. Alvaro Nunsta, disgraced congressman, entered like royalty, welcomed with kisses and champagne. Mariana's blood boiled. He was supposed to be finished. Clara gripped her arm. Now you know why he's not. As the night deepened, the speeches began. A PCC leader stood, raising a glass to the new Brazil, to order through fear, profit through loyalty, and silence through death. Applause thundered. Mariana's hand tightened on her pistol. She could storm in, make a suicidal stand, take a few with her. But Clara placed a trembling hand on hers. Not now, not like this. If we die here, the story dies. To Mariana exhaled slowly, the fury burning her throat. She lowered the gun suddenly. Gunfire cracked outside. Screams erupted. The guards scattered through the trees. Shadows moved as Garas, the serpent's new faction, had come to crash. The summit. Chaos exploded. Bullets shattered. Glass politicians ducked under tables. PCC gunmen fired into the darkness. But the young serpents kept advancing, fearless, hungry. Mariana grabbed Clara. Move now. They fled into the forest as firefights raged behind them. The sound of Brazil's future tearing itself apart, echoing through the mountains. Hours later, bloodied but alive, they stumbled onto a deserted road. Mariana's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You can't stop what's already born. The claws are sharper than the serpent. Clara's face paled. They're not just fighting for control, they're fighting to evolve. Mariana stared into the fog, rolling over the mountains. She realized something terrifying. They hadn't witnessed the end of the serpent, had witnessed the birth of a monster, far worse. Rise of the Clasta. Firefight in Campo Stew. Jordao had shattered more than glass. It had shattered the illusion that the underworld was controlled, predictable, governed by the codes of the serpents, or the PCCIN. The days that followed. São Paulo pulsed with fresh violence. Bus hijackings flared in Capo. Redondo banks were stormed in broad daylight. In Osasco, police stations in Diadema were firebombed. And across every wall in the favelas, the same crude symbol appeared, sprayed in black paint. For slashes like Clausas, Garas had arrived in like the serpents. They had no leader anyone could name, no Dudu Fritas for the police to hunt. No council of bosses who could be bribed or threatened. They moved like wolves. Packs led by young men who had grown up seeing their brothers die for bosses who grew fat in prison there. Motto was whispered in alleys and prison yards. Sem dono, sem medo, só sangue, no owners, no fiero, only blood. Mariana Costa studied the reports obsessively. Every map of the city became a mosaic of strikes and symbols. Every arrest report told her the same story. Kids barely out of their teens, armed with rifles smuggled from Paraguay, striking with military precision, vanishing into the sprawl there. Ghosts, muttered one detective. She still trusted you. Cut one down, 5 more take his place. Mariana knew. It wasn't just numbers, it was belief. The Claws weren't fighting for money, they were fighting to burn down the world. Their parents had lost to corruption. Meanwhile, pieced together the political fallout. Do you see it? She told Mariana one night, spreading newspaper clippings across her apartment floor. The summit was supposed to consolidate power, but as Garas, they broke the alliance. Now every politician, every banker, every PCC capo, they're all terrified. The Claws don't want deals, they want exposure. Chaos war. Mariana sipped her bitter coffee. Then why leave us alive that night? Clara hesitated. Maybe because they want us to watch a week later. Mariana got her answer. She found a package waiting at her door. No return address inside. A cheap burner phone. It buzzed the moment she touched. Ita. Distorted voice rasped through the speaker. Mariana Costa. The serpents are finished. The PCC are pigs in suits, but you. The voice chuckled. You still hunt, you still bleed. We respect that. Mariana's grip tightened. What do you want? To meet. Why me? Because you're not afraid to lose everything that makes you like us. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Clara wanted to smash the phone into pieces. This is suicide. They're baiting you. Mariana shook her head. No, they're testing me. And what happens if you pass their test? Clara asked, her voice rising. You think you can infiltrate them? These aren't criminals with codes. They're zealots with guns. You'll disappear into their jungle and never crawl out. Mariana's eyes darkened. Then, at least I'll know what they really are. 2 nights later, Mariana followed the instructions. The phone spat out a warehouse in the outskirts of Santo Andre. Midnight. The air reeked of gasoline and sweat. Graffiti covered every wall, claws slashing across the faces of politicians. Cops, bankers. At the center stood a circle of masked youths, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes blazing with something between fury and faith. One stepped forward, his mask painted with blood-red slashes. You came. Mariana nodded slowly. You asked. He tilted his head. The city says you're done. No badge, no squad, no power, but we know better. You're proof. The state fears what it cannot control. Mariana's voice was cold. And what do you fear? Laughter rippled through the circle. Nothing, the masked leader said, because, unlike the serpents, we don't sell our souls to politicians. Unlike the PCC, we don't worship money, we worship only the claw. And you, he raised a knife, dragged it across his palm, and smeared blood on the floor in 4 savage lines, will either bleed with us, or bleed for us. Back in her apartment, Clara typed her notes with trembling fingers. She hadn't followed Mariana inside, but she had seen enough from the shadows outside. The chants, the weapons, the feral unity of the closet was like watching a cult arm itself for war. She realized with horror that the story she was writing might never see the light of day, because Asgaras weren't just a gang, they were a revolution, and revolutions didn't end with ecstasy, ended with fireblood. Otha, warehouse air was thick with gasoline, smoke, and the metallic temps of sweat. Mariana stood in the circle, her pistol hidden but useless against 20 rifles. The masked leader's words echoed. Bleed with us, or bleed for us. He pressed the knife into her hand. The blade was jagged, rust-stained. The test a warning. Mariana looked into their eyes, feral, burning with rage that no uniform or courtroom could ever tame. She had seen killers before, but this was different. These weren't soldiers following orders, they were believers, and belief was deadlier than bullets. She dragged the blade across her palm. The cut stung sharp, warm blood dripping onto the concrete. 4 lines of cloth erupted in cheers, stomping boots, slamming rifles against the floor. The leader nodded. Now you are one of us. Mariana kept her face cold, her voice steady. Names mean nothing if you don't act. What's next? The leader's laughter was harsh. Next, you prove it. The proof came swiftly. They led her into the back of the warehouse, where 2 men knelt, bound and gagged. Their faces were bruised, bloodied. One wore the uniform of a rival gang, the other an off-duty policeman. This is Snow Paulo, the leader said. The 2 sides of the same coin, both parasites, both enemies. He shoved the knife back into Mariana's hands. Choose. The circle of masked youths closed in, their chants rising like a storm. Iskoli, skoli, skoli, choose, choose, choose. Choose, choose. Mariana's heart thundered. If she refused, she'd be dead before dawn. If she chose, she crossed a line she swore she never would. Her mind flashed to Clara, to the story waiting to be written, to the people in the city who would never know this night even happened. She crouched, staring at the 2 men. The cop met her gaze with defiance, as if daring her. The gang rival wept, shaking, whispering prayers through bloodied lips. Mariana inhaled slowly, then whispered to the leader, if I'm one of you, I don't need to prove it. With a knife. The leader tilted his head. Then how? She leveled her eyes at him. By giving you the city itself. Silence fell. The chants died. The leader studied her, weighing her words. The city. Mariana nodded. I've hunted serpents. PCC. Politicians. I know how they think, where they hide, how they bleed. Let me give you that information. Kills louder than knives. For a long moment, the leader's eyes narrowed. Then he smiled beneath the mask. You speak like claws, sharp, deadly. We accept your offering for now. He motioned to his men. Take them away. Their blood can wait. The circle erupted again. This time in approval, Mariana exhaled silently, her grip on the knife loosening. She had survived the test, but survival was only the beginning that night. Clara waited for her in a dingy motel near the outskirts. When Mariana slipped in, her palm wrapped in a blood-soaked rag, Clara leaped up. "What did they make you do?" she demanded. Mariana sat heavily on the bed. "Nothing yet." Clara stared, disbelieving. "Mariana, your hands." Mariana cut her off. "Clara, listen to me. They're not like the serpents. They're not even like the PCC. They don't want power. They want to tear it all down. They see themselves as executioners of a corrupt world." Clara's voice trembled. "That means no one is safe." Mariana's eyes were dark, "Especially us." Over the next weeks, Mariana lived a double life. By day, she vanished into the sprawl, shadowing Asgaras through their attacks, ambushes on convoys, coordinated blackouts in neighborhoods, brazen kidnappings of businessmen. By night, she fed scraps of information to Clara, who typed feverishly, her notes growing into a tapestry of terror. The deeper Mariana went, the clearer the truth became. Asgaras weren't just rising, they were multiplying. Their recruits weren't only from the favela's students. Activists, disillusioned workers, all were slipping into the shadows, donning masks, raising claws. It was no longer just crime, it was movement. One evening, the masked leader summoned Mariana. "You bleed with us now," he said, "but trust is earned through fire. Tomorrow, we strike not banks, not buses." Bigger. Mariana's gut tightened. "What target?" His voice was calm, chilling the Legislative Assembly of Snow Paulo. When she told Clara, the journalist's face went pale. "That's not a gang hit," Clara whispered. "That's an act of war." Mariana nodded grimly. "And I'll be inside when it happens." The assembly burns. The Legislative Assembly of Snow Paulo stood like a fortress of glass and steel along the Avenida Pedro Alvarez Cabral, its polished facade reflecting the lights of Ibirapora Park. It had weathered protests, scandals, and corruption trials for decades, but it had never faced Asgaras in the morning of the attack. Mariana blended in among them. A mask concealed her face. A rifle weighed heavy on her shoulders. She had been given no choice. To refuse would expose her. To comply meant becoming complicit in history's bloodiest chapter. The masked leader's voice thundered in her ears. "Today, Snow Paulo will see that no institution is untouchable today." The claws carved their mark on the state itself. They moved in convoys of stolen cars, rifles hidden beneath coats, explosives packed into duffel bags. Mariana sat in the back seat, silent, her eyes scanning every street, every escape route. Her mind wasn't on survival. It was on Clariche had left the journalist a single message: "Stay away from downtown, whatever happens. Publish everything." Clara's reply had been a single word: "Always." The assault began at noon. Tourists snapped photos outside the assembly. Staffers filed in with coffee cups and briefcases. Then the cars screeched to a halt. Masks on guns raised. The first volley shattered the glass doors, scattering workers in terror. Shouts echoed, alarms blared. But it was too late. The claws surged inside, chanting, firing into ceilings, spraying the walls with their symbol. 4 black slashes. Mariana's stomach turned as she followed. Her rifle raised but unused. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene, but she wasn't ready, not yet. Inside the chamber, chaos reigned. Politicians cowered behind desks. Armed guards tried to respond, but were cut down in seconds. The leader stood on the central podium, his voice amplified by stolen microphones. "Brothers and sisters of Snow Paulo," he roared, "you were lied to. These halls of power are temples of corruption. But today, the claws of truth shred the veil." The masked youths roared in approval, stomping boots, slamming rifles. Mariana's heart pounded. This wasn't just an attack, it was theater terror as spectacle. Then came the hostages. Staffers and deputies were herded into the chamber, forced onto their knees. Cameras appeared, not from the press, but from Asgaras themselves. Phones, live streams, Encrypted feeds the world was watching in real time. One deputy pleaded for mercy, sweat dripping down his face. Please. My children, the leader silenced him with a rifle, but no more speeches today. The people speak with bullets. He handed a pistol to one of the youngest recruits, a boy who couldn't have been more than 16. Prove your claws, the leader commanded. The boy trembled, his mask slipping, tears streaked his cheeks, but when the deputy begged again, the boy's hand steadied. The shot echoed through the chamber. The deputy collapsed. Silence followed, then a roar of approval. Mariana's blood froze. She had seen executions before, but never like this, never wrapped in the language of revolution, never broadcast 2000s as Garas weren't hiding their crimes, they were performing them outside. Police sirens wailed, helicopters circled overhead, armored vehicles surrounded the building. A standoff had begun, but the leader welcomed it. He raised his rifle high. Let them come. We are not serpents hiding in alleys. We are not PCC counting money. We are the claws, and we do not fear death. The crowd erupted again, a frenzy of devotion. Mariana realized something terrifying. If the police stormed the building, it wouldn't be a rescue, it would be a massacre, one the claws would embrace as martyrdom in the shadows. Mariana's phone buzzed, a hidden message from Clara. Somehow slipped past the chaos. I'm outside, live feeds are spreading, the world sees them. Tell me what to do. Mariana's hands shook as she typed back. Don't come in whatever happens. You have to survive. She slipped the phone away, just as the leader turned toward her. You, he barked, you bleed with us. Now you lead with us. Stand beside me. Mariana stepped onto the podium, her rifle heavy in her hands, her heart torn between two impossible choices. Reveal herself and ire. Keep the mask and live long enough to destroy them from within. The assembly, once a symbol of law, now belonged to the claw's end. Mariana Costa stood at the center of it, a hunter trapped in the lair of Wolsta. Legislative Assembly was no longer a government building, it was a avenida. Pedro Alvarez Cabral, choked with armored vehicles, riot police, and helicopters circling like vultures. Thousands of civilians crowded behind barricades, chanting, filming, streaming every moment. The city itself had become an audience inside. The chamber reeked of sweat, blood, and gunpowder. Politicians whimpered on their knees. Young claws patrolled with jittery fingers on triggers. Their leader prowled the podium, reveling in the spectacle. Look at them, he shouted, gesturing toward the hostages, parasites, leeches, pigs fattened on the people's misery. And outside, the state pretends to be savior when it is the same disease. The chamber thundered with chants. Semdo, sem medo, só sangue. No owners, no fear, only blood. Mariana stood stiff beside him, mask still concealing her face, every word carved at her sanity. She had spent her career chasing criminals, but this was no longer crime, it was theater of war. Her eyes darted to the doors, the windows, the hallways, escape routes, choke points, kill zones. Every instinct told her the siege could end in one way only: slaughter across the barricades outside. Clara Alvarez clutched her press badge, her phone streaming live. She hadn't wanted to be here, but the story had pulled her like gravity. She spoke directly into the lens. This is no longer just Snow Paulo's story. The world is watching a movement that refuses to hide. As Garas claim, they are the voice of the forgotten, but inside those walls, innocent people are kneeling at gunpoint. If this siege ends in blood, it will not be forgotten, and it will not be forgiven. Her feed exploded with viewers' comments, flew in every second. Rage, support, threats, sympathy. The claws weren't just holding a building, they were capturing imaginations across Brazil. 2 p.m. A voice boomed through police loudspeakers. This is Commander Alves of the Policia Militar. Release the hostages and lay down your weapons. The building is surrounded. You have no escape inside. Laughter erupted. The leader spread his arms wide, mocking the command, no escape. Listen well, pigs of the state. We were born with no escape. We live with no escape, and we die with no escape. He turned to his soldiers, fire blazing in his eyes if they storm. We paint the floor with blood, let the world see what happens when the forgotten sharpen their claws. Mariana's heart pounded. She stepped closer to the leader, lowering her voice. If you kill them all, you lose everything. Martyrs die once, movements die with them. The leader studied her through the mask. You fear death. No, Mariana answered coldly. I fear waste. He smirked, as if amused by her defiance, but she had bought herself a sliver of time out. Clara's phone buzzed with a new encrypted message. It was from Mariana. Siege won't last. They'll kill hostages. Need distraction. Clara's hands trembled as she typed back, what kind? The reply came instantly. Anything that pulls eyes away from the chamber. 10 minutes, do it. Clara's stomach churned. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a cop. She was a journalist with nothing but words. But sometimes words were weapons sharper than bullets. She lifted her phone again, went live, and spoke with fire in her voice. To those watching around the world, the claws have promised blood, the police promise rescue, but ask yourself, whose blood will it be? Who are the real victims here? The corrupt who hid behind these walls for decades, or the youth with nothing left to lose? What happens next will define Brazil for generations. Her feed went viral. The crowd outside grew restless, shouting at both police and the claws. The standoff wavered inside. The leader's lieutenants brought him phones, showing him Clara's broadcast. He laughed. Even the press speaks our language now. The state's grip is broken. Mariana's jaw tightened. Clara wasn't helping. She was inflaming. But perhaps that was the distraction she needed. The leader raised his rifle. It's time we show the pigs outside our claws. Bring me a deputy. 2 masked youths dragged a trembling politician forward. The man screamed, begging, offering money, favors. His life. The leader pressed the rifle barrel to his head. Cameras ready. Every phone in the chamber lifted. Mariana's pulse spiked. She couldn't wait any longer. As the leader prepared to pull the trigger, Mariana stepped forward, her own rifle snapping up, aimed not at the hostage, but at the ceiling. The blast shattered lights. Raining sparks. Confusion rippled. Police breach. She screamed in Portuguese, her voice commanding positions. Chaos exploded, claws scattered, taking cover. Thinking the assault had begun, hostages dropped to the floor. The leader roared in fury, searching for betrayal land. In that instant, Mariana grabbed the deputy, dragging him behind cover, whispering fiercely, "Stay down if you want to live outside." Police radios erupted with confusion. They're shooting inside. Do we move? Commander Alves hesitated, sweat dripping down his brow. Hold positions. Wait for confirmation if we storm too early. Everyone dies. The city held its breath inside. The leader's eyes locked on Mariana. Suspicion burned. You. He hissed. That shot wasn't police. That was you. Mariana raised her rifle again, mask hiding her face. Believe what you want, but if you waste bullets on me, the pigs outside will eat you alive. The leader stared at her, his fury barely contained. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. Fine, let the siege continue. But one mistake, one flicker of betrayal, and your blood feeds the floor. Mariana exhaled, heart pounding. She had delayed the execution, but the siege was far from over. The claws still gripped the assembly, and the city still watched, hungry for blood. Night without light. By nightfall, São Paulo felt like a city with its throat cut. The legislative assembly was blacked out, windows barricaded, electricity cut by police to break the rebels' resolve. The only light came from helicopter spotlights sweeping across the plaza, their beams slicing the darkness like blades. The crowd outside had thinned, but not dispersed. Fires burned in oil drums, protest signs waved, and the dark drums pounded. Chants rose and fell, echoing against the concrete snow. Paulo had turned into an open-air coliseum, the people unwilling to leave until blood spilled inside. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere curdled. The claws were restless, hunger gnawed, fear crept. But adrenaline still kept them standing. They whispered of police tunnels, gas, Snipers, every shadow felt like a death sentence. The leader sat on the speaker's chair, a dark silhouette, lit by candle flame. His voice was hoarse but unwavering. They think darkness weakens us. But we are the children of darkness. We were born in alleys with no lamps, hunted in shadows where police dogs roamed. This blackout is home. His followers roared approval, slamming rifle stocks against the floor. Mariana sat apart, mask hiding her face, mind racing. She had bought time earlier, but time itself was poison. Each passing hour eroded discipline, eroded patience. Eventually, someone would break, and when that happened, the massacre would come outside. Clara Alvarez felt her phone buzz with another coded message from Mariana. They're cracking soon. They'll kill to prove strength. I need you inside. Clara froze inside. She wasn't armed, wasn't trained. She was a reporter, not a soldier, but she understood what Mariana meant. The only shield left was visibility. If cameras went dark, so would the hostages. She turned to the police barricade commander. Alves was pacing, jaw tight, eyes scanning the assembly. Clara approached. I need to go in, Alves barked, a humorless laugh. Journalist suicide. Out of the question. If they start executions, your men won't get there in time, but if they know the world is watching from inside, they'll hesitate. Cameras are the only thing keeping that chamber from turning into a slaughterhouse. Alves hesitated. He wasn't blind to the truth. His orders were clear. No negotiations with terrorists, but he also knew what would happen if the operation ended in corpses of deputies. His career and the city would burn. You have 5 minutes inside, no more, he muttered, if they let you live. Clara's heart hammered as 2 officers fitted her with a hidden mic and a small transmitter. The world would hear whatever she heard with her press badge dangling, hands raised. She walked across the no man's land, toward the barricaded doors. Shouts echoed inside, rifles leveled at her through the cracks. Then the leader's voice boomed. Who dares? Clara steadied her voice. Clara Alvarez, Independent Press. I want to tell your story from inside. A long silence then. Slowly, the doors creaked open. The chamber swallowed her whole. The smell hit first: sweat, fear, candle smoke. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, masks glinting in the dim light, phones lifted, cameras aimed, capturing her arrival. She wasn't just entering a siege. She was stepping onto a stage. The leader rose from the speaker's chair. So the world sends a scribe, not a general, not a negotiator, a woman with a pen. Clara's voice trembled, but she held steady. The world doesn't care what generals say. They care what they see. And right now, all they see is a room full of guns and hostages. If you want to be heard, let me film you. Let me show why you're here. Murmurs rippled. Some claws nodded eagerly. Recognition, validation. Others hissed suspicion. The leader studied her, then gestured toward the cameras already streaming live on the floor. We broadcast ourselves. Why do we need you? Clara stepped closer. Because people don't believe propaganda. They believe witnesses. They believe someone who can bleed. That line landed. Mariana, listening from the shadows, felt a surge of cold admiration. Clara wasn't just buying time. She was stepping into the role of shield, bargaining her life against the chamber's hunger for spectacle. The leader finally lowered his rifle. Fine, you stay, you film, but if your pen cuts against us, it will be your last sentence. Clara nodded, heart racing, sweat on her back. She had crossed the liners, dragged midnight. Then 1, then 2. The assembly became a fevered cage. Some claws sang protest songs, others wept silently. Politicians muttered prayers. Mariana never moved far from Clara, quietly positioning herself like a shadow between the journalist and the young militants. If the chamber exploded, she was ready to gamble her mask, her life, everything. The leader, pacing like a caged lion, finally barked an order at dawn. We strike. Either they give us a corridor to leave, or we make our escape with blood. The claws erupted in cheers. Mariana's stomach dropped. Dawn meant the end. She glanced at Clara, who caught her eye for the briefest second. Both women understood. They had less than 4 hours to prevent Snow Paulo from waking to slaughter dawn of fire. The first gray fingers of dawn crept across Snow Paulo's skyline, brushing the towers with pale light. The city, restless all night, seemed to hold its breath. Streets around the Legislative Assembly lay choked with armored vehicles, riot police, and barricades. Helicopters hovered low, engines thrumming like war drums inside. The chamber was fever hot, heavy with the stink of sweat, wax, and gun oil. The leader of Asgaras stood before his followers, arms raised, his voice cracked with exhaustion, but blazed with fire. Bros, sisters, this is our hour. When the sun rises, so do we. Either they open us a corridor of freedom, or we carve one with their blood. Rifles lifted, fists pounded, boots stomped the claws. Half mad with fatigue and adrenaline, chanted back, Liberdade, Sangue, Liberdade, Sangue. Freedom blood, freedom blood, freedom blood. Mariana's heart hammered as she scanned the room. The hostages were pale, trembling eyes wide with terror. Deputies, clerks, guardsmen and women who'd never seen the barrel of a rifle so close, waiting for the inevitable end. Clara, the journalist, sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook open, pen steady. Despite the tremor in her hands, she wrote as though every second mattered, as though truth itself depended on her scribbles. Her hidden mic transmitted it all. The chants, the threats, the tightening new-stew radios across the police line. Mariana edged closer, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. Dawn is death. We can't let them out. Clara didn't look up. Then we stopped them somehow outside. Commander Alves barked orders into his radio. The siege had reached breaking point. The governor demanded resolution. Snipers in position, breachers ready if they move out with guns. We end it. His second-in-command hesitated. Sir. Civilians inside. Journalists. Alves clenched his jaw. Collateral damage if we wait. Catastrophe if they escape. His eyes flicked to the rising sun. He had less than an hour before political pressure forced his hand inside the assembly. The claws readied themselves, ammunition checked, rifles loaded, homemade explosives strapped to belts. The leader barked instructions. Pairs at the doors, squads on the flanks. Keep hostages close. As shields. Mirana's stomach twisted. They weren't bluffing, they were preparing for war. She made her choice, slipping through the shadows. She approached Clara and pressed something small, metallic, into her palm. A flash drive. Clara blinked at it. What? Everything. Mariana whispered. Names, operations. They're real leaders. I've been inside long enough to know it all. If I fall, you unexpose them. Clara's breath caught. Her pen stopped. She looked at Mariana, really looked, and realization flickered in her eyes. You're not one of them, she whispered. Mariana gave the faintest nod. Then she pulled her mask tighter, rifle against her chest, and melted back into formation. The first gunshot cracked. At 6:04 a.m. a sniper's warning shot into the air. A signal. Time's up. The chamber erupted in shouts. Some claws panicked. Others gripped rifles tighter. The leader bellowed above the chaos. They fire first. We answer last. Forward, forward. Doors crashed open. Daylight streamed in and the claws surged into it, dragging hostages before them. The plaza exploded. Spotlights blazed. Police loudspeakers screamed orders. The crowd of onlookers scattered as bullets tore the morning air. Mariana moved with the claws, rifle raised, but never firing. Her eyes locked on Clara, who had slipped among the hostages. If chaos swallowed them, she had one chance to pull her out alive. But the leader had other plans. Standing tall atop the steps, arms wide, he shouted to the sky, Snow Paulo, witness the birth of your new dawn. He pulled a detonator from his vest. Mariana's blood froze. Explosives. She lunged forward, but in that instant, the world fractured into gunfire, screams, and smoke. The dawn had come, and with it, fire. The detonator. The plaza outside the Legislative Assembly was a battlefield before the first shot truly landed. Police rifles cracked from the barricades. The claws returned fire, dragging terrified hostages across the steps. As human shields, smoke grenades burst. rolling in gray clouds that blurred friend and foe alike. Helicopters thundered overhead, their spotlights cutting jagged cones through the haze. In the middle of it all, the leader of Asgara stood tall on the stone steps, his mask streaked with soot, a small black detonator clutched in his fist. "Witness," he roared, his voice booming across microphones and live streams. "Snow Paulo will remember this day not as defeat, but as resurrection." He raised the detonator. High-end. Mariana Costa moved. She shoved past a panicked recruit, dropping her rifle. Her eyes locked on the leader's fist. Every nerve screamed at her. This was the end game, if his thumb pressed that button. Dozens of hostages, maybe hundreds of officers outside, would die in fire. Her legs carried her faster than thought. She slammed into him, just as his thumb twitched. The detonator clattered across the marble steps. Spinning wildly, the leader snarled. Recognizing betrayal, his mask slipped just enough for Mariana to see his eyes wild. Bloodshot, almost radiant with fanaticism. "You," he hissed. "Traitor." His fist swung. Cracking against her jaw, she staggered, but held firm, grappling with him. Both of them clawing for the detonator. Clara saw it all through the smoke, pinned among the hostages. Notebook and mic still clutched. She narrated instinctively, her voice trembling but unbroken. Clara Alvarez stood before a cluster of cameras, her hair tangled, soot smudged on her face, voice raw from smoke and fear, yet she spoke clearly, deliberately, her words rolling live across Brazil's television screens. This morning, Snow Paulo witnessed both horror and resistance. The claws seized our assembly, held hostages, and tried to turn blood into propaganda, but they failed, not because of police alone, and not because of politics. They failed because the truth broke through their theater, and that truth is this: Snow Paulo is stronger than its shadows. Applause rippled through the reporters. Though Clara knew it wasn't for her, it was for survival itself. But when she stepped away from the cameras, exhaustion hit her like a blow. Her hands trembled violently. Pen clattering from her grip. Mariana was there to catch it before it fell. "You said what needed to be said," she murmured. Clara looked at her, eyes searching. "And you did what nobody else could." She lowered her voice. "You saved them. You saved me." Mariana didn't answer. She wasn't used to praise. Her gaze lingered on the smoldering assembly, on the body bags being carried out. Victory felt hollow inside. A nearby police van, captured claws, sat shackled, their masks stripped away. Most were barely older than schoolboys. Their eyes darted between fear and defiance. One spat at the floor, hissing, "The claws aren't dead." Cut one. Two more grow. Commander Alves stepped inside, his uniform crisp. Despite the chaos, he crouched before the trembling boy who had turned, his rifle against the leader. "You shot him," Alves said quietly. "Why?" The boy's voice cracked. Because he was lying. He said we were fighting for the poor, for the streets, but he just wanted blood. I couldn't." His words dissolved into tears. Studied him, then glanced back at the others, silent, glaring, unbroken. He saw the fracture line, the recruits who could be salvaged, and the zealots who couldn't take him to interrogation separately. Alves ordered. "He's not like the rest." By afternoon, the politicians emerged, pale and shaken, some still dusted with plaster from the firefight. Their speeches filled the airwaves, condemnations, promises, declarations of resilience. "The government of Snow Paulo will never bow to terror. This is proof that the state must invest more in security. We honor the victims, but we must remember, criminals are not revolutionaries behind the podiums." Their words sounded strong, but Mariana knew better. She could see it in their eyes. Fear not of the claws themselves, but of the truth Clara had unleashed. If the claws could breach the assembly, no wall of privilege was safe that night. As the city tried to settle, Mariana and Clara sat together in a quiet cafe on Rua Augusta. The cafe was half empty, filled with the murmurs of patrons replaying news clips on their phones. Clara sipped bitter coffee, her notebook lying closed for the first time in days. "They'll spin this however they want," she muttered. "Politicians, police, even gangs, everyone will claim victory. But the truth is, it was chaos. It could have gone either way. Mariana leaned back, her body aching from bruises. Truth doesn't sell, stories do, and they'll turn this into whatever story keeps people obedient. Clara looked at her sharply. Then we tell our own for a moment. Mariana considered it. Her whole life had been shadows, lies, masks, but Clara's conviction burned like a beacon, dangerous. Yes, but maybe the only way forward. You still have the drive I gave you? Mariana asked quietly. Nara nodded, hidden safe. Then, when the time is right, you publish it. All of it. Clara reached across the table, her hand brushing Mariana's, a silent pact, but even as they forged it, the city stirred with unease across São Paulo. Graffiti bloomed overnight on walls and bus stops. Ufogo namagi. The fire does not die. The claws were gone, but their shadow had only begun to spread behind the curtains. Paulo never sleeps. But after the siege, it felt restless in a different way. The city's rhythms, the markets, the traffic, the blaring horns were all tinted with unease. People walked faster, glancing over shoulders, whispering about as garas. Some swore the group had been destroyed. Others swore it was only the beginning, and, in the towers of government, silence was louder than any gunshot. At Palacio das Ben, the governor convened his cabinet behind closed doors. A dozen men and women, polished in suits, shuffled papers, spoke in clipped tones, avoided eye contact. Commander Alves stood at the far end of the long table, delivering his report. The leader is dead, 43 detained, 31 hostages freed, casualties 17 confirmed, explosives recovered. He paused before the last line, his voice hardening. But this was not an isolated cell. Their supply lines were professional, their weapons were military grade. Someone with resources backed them. The governor, a broad man with calculating eyes, tapped his pen against the table. And you're suggesting that as garas were not grassroots, they had sponsors, political or criminal, maybe both. The room shifted uncomfortably. Too many eyes avoided his. Alves caught it. The governor finally sighed. Commander, I respect your service, but speculation is dangerous right now. The people want closure, not conspiracy. Officially, as garas are dead. Understood? Alves stiffened. He understood perfectly. Truth was inconvenient. Clara Alvarez worked from her apartment, surrounded by walls of notes, drives, and printed stills from live streams. Her phone buzzed constantly. Interview requests, network offers, death threats, but she ignored them all. Her focus was the flash drive. Mariana had given her hours bled away as she pieced through encrypted files. Names, accounts, transfers, photos, a map of corruption that stretched far beyond São Paulo's streets. At the center, one name surfaced again and again. Deputado Raul Vegas, rising political star. Vegas had built his brand on being the voice of the forgotten, champion of the poor, critic of corruption, critic of the very assembly he worked in. He had condemned violence loudly. Yet in file after file, Clara saw his fingerprints. Anonymous donations funneled through shell NGOs, community centers doubling as claws recruitment hubs, coded communications that aligned too closely with the group's movements. Her stomach turned stiff. She published this. It wouldn't just topple a politician. It could rip open the fragile facade the state was clinging to, and it could get her killed. Mariana, on the other hand, walked a razor's edge. She had shed her mask, but not her danger. Alves had debriefed her briefly, his eyes narrowing with suspicion at every answer. Who she was, why she had been inside, how she had survived, didn't add up. She was listed as a hostage who resisted unofficially. Whispers circled. Some officers already called her a traitor who turned at night. She patrolled the edges of her safe house, pistol always in reach. Sleep a fleeting luxury. She knew sooner or later someone would come. Claws loyalists seeking revenge, or state men eager to silence loose ends. She thought often of Clara. The journalist's fire was dangerous, necessary, maybe, but dangerous. The first interrogation leaks arrived days later. One of the captured claws, a teenage recruit, admitted under pressure that their funding had come from the top. From the people in suits, he named no names, but the clip recorded, on a smuggled phone spread across social media in hours. We thought we were fighting for the streets, but they used us. They wanted chaos. And we were there. Claws, the video sparked outrage. Protests flared outside the assembly again, not in support of the claws this time, but against the government. Who are the real criminals? Signs demanded the line between state and insurgency blurred further that night. Clara called Mariana. They'll bury this, Clara said. Voice taught the files point straight at Vegas. Maybe others if I publish. They'll deny it. Call it fake if I stay quiet. They win. Mariana's silence stretched before she answered. Truth doesn't matter. To men like him, power does, if you strike. Strike clean, no doubts, no holes. Clara's voice lowered. Will you help me? Mariana closed her eyes. She'd spent her life avoiding allies, building walls, but somehow, Clara had slipped through. Yes, she said finally, but once this starts, there's no going back for either of us. Across Snow Paulo, shadows shifted. Deputado Raul Vegas smiled for cameras, shaking hands at ribbon cuttings, promising reforms, but in his office, a single message burned on his encrypted phone. The fire still burns. Prepare the next strike.